Okay. Good morning. As we continue to develop the background and understanding of the end of Ayin Beis, which the Rebbe Rashab never concluded writing, we're learning the Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe on page 393. We finished the paragraph on 393, which, as I said, is the source material for the end of Ayin Beis. And we're already now in the area where the Rebbe Rashab had stopped. The Rebbe Rashab finished in the writing the concept of unity, of the higher unity, the lower unity, and how they become one, to appreciate how all of existence, including the animal soul, should be able to understand how all of existence is all part of God's all-encompassing reality. But the Rebbe Rashab never went back to the animal soul. He just stopped by the Yichud. The Mittler Rebbe does continue based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, and we've learned so far about how it affects the animal soul. That we learned already starting from page 388. He went back to how it's Ner Hashem Nishma Sodam, how it's all captured in that verse, the candle that consists of the wick of the divine soul immersing itself into the oil of the animal soul, turning it into fuel to create the fire, love and passion of Ahavtas Hashem L'kecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei tzerecha. And now we moved on bottom of page 390 to the second verse, which also mentions the ner, the candle. And this time it's about the mitzvah. Ner mitzvah v'teira, with the operative question being, why is a mitzvah compared to ner? And ultimately, how does that add to the ner Hashem Nishma Sodam, the candle of the neshama, which is also a candle on its own? So what we've learned so far in that context is this: that ner mitzvah is referring to the mitzvahs gashmis. The mitzvahs in this world are taking material matter, physical matters, and turning it into a mitzvah of Hashem. That itself is a transformation of taking the oil, which here represents the dvarim gashmi that the mitzvahs are done with, whether it's klaf, parchment that comes from animal hide for tefillin, or sefer Torah or mezuzah, or wool that comes from a sheep for the tzitzis. And the same thing with all the other physical objects. We're reading in this week's parsha about taking physical objects and turning them into a mishkan for Hashem, gold, silver, copper, and all the other materials that were used to build a mishkan, a sanctuary. So all that represents the transformation of the oil of the material world into a mitzvah of Hashem, into a place of holiness. And what does the mitzvah do? It draws down Kedusha. Not just Kedusha, not just sanctity, but the highest level of Kodesh Elyon, as he said. All the way from Primus and Atzmus Ein Sof, what he calls Kedusha Atzmus, Ein Kodesh Kavaya, which is higher than all the Kedusha that we have in the lower levels, in the levels of Ishtalshalos, including Seviv and Mamala. That's what a mitzvah draws from. And as such, it's higher than Chochmah. Chochmah is also called Kodesh, but Chochmah is still within Ishtalshalos, this is like Orchen de Golgalta, like the paths of the skull, which is higher than Chochmah, and all the way up to Primus Atzmus Ein Sof. That's what we've been learning. So that's what a mitzvah does. That's where the mitzvahs draw down from. And then we understand that a mitzvah, since it's drawing from such a high level, that's what it contributes also to neshama, and even to the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu and the neshama of Avram Avinu, and the same thing with all the other tzaddikim. It's the it brings down this higher kedusha, like we say in the bracha, which we say before the mitzvah. Eivel asiyasan, baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, and then we perform the mitzvah that's drawing down from these higher levels that are higher than the sherish of the source of the soul in Chochmah Vatzilus, even higher than Moshe Rabbeinu, Primus Chochmah, Primus Abba Shem Ma, is drawing from these higher levels. The same thing with Avram. So mitzvah draws from this highest level, and that's what it contributes to neshama, because as the neshama comes down below, it's in the level of Chochmah Vatzilus. And then the Mittler Rebbe summed it up in the last paragraph we learned, the bottom of 392 and on top of 393, with two key points here. One is that we learned earlier that the neshama does not need tikkun. It does not come down below for its own tikkun, because it's already in a state of tikkun. It comes from the pure world, from a seamless world of Atzilus. That's where the neshama comes from. So, but once it did come down, im kol zeh, once it does come down, and its purpose of coming down is what? Is to be mevar berurim. It's to transform the animal soul and transform the world. Then the neshama also benefits from it. It's not just the neshama comes down to do a job and there's no effect on it. So it wouldn't have come down for its own purpose, because it would have been, it's on that lofty level on its own. But once it comes down, it does get elevated to through Ma'aseh Mitzvos for the reason that we said before. So that's that. And now and then he said v'oid mitam shenoz tchilos b'seifon. That additional point, the fact that the beginning is wedged in the end, which means how do you get that higher level of Kedusha, Kodesh, Elyon, that comes from Primis Atzmus of Ein Sof? That's dafke when you come down below in a physical world in Klipas Neiga, where there's surmara, you have to deal with negative things that are antithetical to godliness, and you refrain, you prevent yourself from engaging with them, and you elevate this physical world. That's where you reach the level of the chol tichla, the level of the chava mitzvah ma'ed, that every pleasure has some limit. But the enega atzme of mitzvahs is chava ma'ed, is bligvul. And where do you access that dafke when you engage with the darkness? When you bring the Kedusha of mitzvahs in a world like a dark world like ours, in Gashmis, which is the reason the neshama comes down. So the neshama doesn't come down for itself; it comes to refine the world. In that process, it's accessing mitzvahs maisis that you could only do in this world. That's why we say Yofa Shachas B'Tshuva Maisim Tevim Kol Chayelam Haba. It's only Tshuva Maisim Tevim Elam Haza, in this lowest of world, that you can access this highest level of mitzvahs. And these are the Maisim Tevim Shebachol Yem V'Yem Sha'esa. These are the good deeds, the mitzvahs that a person does on a daily basis. Shamashlim Nafshe. They complete his soul. They complete and actualize the soul. So even though the soul would not have come down on its own for that purpose, but once it comes down and engages in the darkness of the world, it's mashlim nafshe, and it creates levushim and makifim. Me'irim l'nishmase me'ed b'teis v'ser meruba. It gets an increased level of energy. You could also say, I'm thinking about it, that this va'oid maybe is coming to say that Tilya was saying the neshama doesn't come down for itself, it comes down to, but once it comes down, it gets this elevation. But now he's saying the neshama comes down to get maybe this elevation. Maybe that is the reason to come down. Maybe that's the va'oid. That you could say the neshama doesn't come down for itself. Once it comes, it gets an elevation, or it actually comes down to receive this level of elevation. Not sure, I have to look into that a bit more. And that's what it says, Avram Zokim Ba Bayomim. It says that he came into his days because he had all his complete days. That means every day, the levush, the garment of that day, was completely actualized. There was not one wasted day. And those days added energy to him, to his neshama, doing the good deeds and the mitzvahs. And that's v'halach lefanecha tzidkecha ani b'tzadik echza panecha and tzedakah tereimim goy. He brings three expressions around the word tzedakah, which here is referring to general mitzvahs, that they all show reaching a level of deeper pnimius. Lefanecha tzidkecha b'tzadik echza panecha b'tzedakah the mitzvahs ma'isidav tzedakah tereimim goy. The level of tereimim, it elevates the goy, the nation, so it all comes to a level that reaches the highest levels of godliness, dafka through mitzvahs. And that's why you have Moshe Rabbeinu and Avram Avinu, even the highest souls are responsible to do mitzvahs in this world. Because if you say the neshama is higher than mitzvahs, why do they have to do mitzvahs? Because mitzvahs add this dimension. And as we said, we're going to talk more about this, what this means exactly, because we also know the neshamas are rooted higher than Torah mitzvahs. So how does this work exactly? That we'll see as we go further, and especially when we bring it back to the themes in Ayin Beis. And that's where we're up to, finishing the paragraph on page 393. Unless there are questions, I'm ready to continue on here. Okay. So the new paragraph on page 393, and the pages again can be found at iambays.com. They're all scanned there, the PDFs of these of this mimer. Okay. V'hinei levadze. And now, besides the fact that what we just learned, Shemaisa mitzvahs mailim l'neshama helikis v'chai behem kanal, that the action of mitzvahs, maisa mitzvahs, the actual mitzvahs that we do in this world, elevate the soul, the divine soul. V'chai behem, like he said earlier, that it adds chayis to the neshama from chaya chayim. We learned that earlier on page 391. So that was how we interpret v'chai behem. Sheyiseisiv v'eira l'ki b'neshama chaya chayim. So mitzvahs add life to the neshama. Even though neshama is a divine soul with all its qualities, we learn Shema Yisrael, and it's rooted in Olah b'machshava in the highest levels. But bottom line, a mitzvah adds chayes because a mitzvah is drawing from Kodesh Elyon. He says, levadze, besides that, or in addition to that, oidzos, furthermore, or moreover, mashagam nefesh abamis hativis tisalagam hi ima by soisa echad mechol mitzvahs Hashem b'kavono berusa deliba. So till now, what he was talking about, he didn't mention the animal soul. He said the divine soul gets elevated. But in addition to the divine soul getting elevated, there's another thing happening here, which was the primary thing that we began discussing earlier, what Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam does, that it refines the animal soul. Remember, V'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'shnei yitzarecha. So now the Mitler Rebbe is coming back and showing how a mitzvah is not just elevates the divine soul. It also has, to use the words of the Torah Eir, and all this, as I pointed out, is all an explanation of a few lines in Torah Eir. If you look on page 38c or 76 in Torah Eir, he said, Ner shel mitzvah shamitzvah yesh lo zgula pratis lahalis es nefesh habamis. That's how the Alter Rebbe began. A mitzvah has a special feature, power, to elevate the animal soul and bind it to Elokus. Like we say, Asher kedushan b'mitzvos v'tzvon b'kodesh Elyon shu l'mayla min ishtalshlos. There, the Alter Rebbe went straight to the nefesh habamis. The Mitler Rebbe, in explaining that, spoke about the whole idea of Kodesh Elyon and what it does even for the nefesh halikis. So interestingly, in Torah Eir, you don't really see what Ner Mitzvah does for the nefesh halikis. He doesn't explain it. I'm just looking afterwards if he can. Right. The focus here is primarily on the nefesh habamis, but the Mitler Rebbe, in his elaboration, really explained that he begins by explaining its effect on the nefesh halikis, which I think, as we're going to learn further, is actually going to help us understand. Because then, in other words, when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Baruch Shem, then we say V'haftas Hashem Elokecha. It's not just that the Shema Yisrael affects the animal soul; it affects also V'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'shnei yitzarecha, also the divine soul. So the idea of a mitzvah is adding to the neshama both the animal's divine soul and the animal soul. That's this new paragraph now. Levad zeh shemaisa mitzvahs ma'il neshama lekis v'chai behem kanal oidzos mashagam nefesh habamis hativis. In addition to that, also the animal soul, the natural animal soul, tesala, is elevated. Gam hi ima, together with the elevation of the divine soul, also the animal soul is elevated. When you do one of the mitzvahs, b'kavana, with intention, u'b'reusa deliba, with the desire of the heart. In other words, you're not just doing it mechanically; you're doing it with intention, with pnimius, with neshama, with passion of the heart. Av belev basar ativis, such a passion of the heart that also affects the physical and natural heart, like we learned earlier, that it affects the actual heart where the nefesh habamis resides, leiv basar. So it's not just the avos Hashem of the divine soul in its own pure sublime place, but it actually permeates and affects the person in the physical sense, in the body, in the actual heart, which includes, of course, the animal soul. V'hainu, and this means mashagam nefesh hasichlis hanushis. This means that also, this is referring to also the fact that also the human intelligence, the nefesh hasichlis hanushis. So there's the nefesh halikis, the nefesh habamis, nefesh hasichlis hativis. We learned is most likely the nefesh hasichlis of the nefesh habamis, that the intelligent soul, that natural soul of human intelligence, should elevate to the place and the madrega and the level of chachma of the divine soul. So this chachma of the nefesh halikis, like we learned in Torah and in Mitler Rebbe's Maimer, and then this chachma of the nefesh habamis. On its own, the nefesh habamis, wisdom and intelligence, is used for its own needs. Like you see, an animal can be quite intelligent for its own hunting, its own survival, its own protection, and so on. But the goal is to turn it into oil, chachma, that will be feed and fuel godliness, not its own needs. So he's saying here is that this is what we speak about, that the nefesh hasichlis is also being convinced and understanding to become the same level of chachma nefesh halikis. It's appreciating that level of chachma. Who? Okay. So that's what he added right now. Now this is a very, very interesting. I'd say more than that, very powerful. I would say link in understanding the whole idea, because as I said, the Mitler Rebbe went into a whole discussion of what a mitzvah is and what it affects the neshama. But now he wants to bring it back to the main theme. The main theme is to affect the animal soul. So this is this additional point. So now he's going to explain how the Kedusha of mitzvahs don't just elevate the divine soul, they elevate the animal soul as well. And this is what mitzvahs are adding to what the neshama does on its own when it affects the animal soul, which we learned in Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, in the Shema Yisrael and V'ahavta. But now it's the mitzvahs are adding, and we'll learn more about that addition as we go along. Any questions about these last few lines? Okay. And what is the dynamic? What's the process here? How does it work? How does a mitzvah do this? For who? Remember, a mitzvah draws from Kodesh Elyon. Shekedishanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu, v'hu ayidei b'chinas makiv d'kedusha elyena zu shebemitzvos. That this makiv d'kedusha elyena, it's a makiv, like we said, it's above the immanent and the internal faculties, like chachma. So it's makiv d'kedusha elyena of mitzvos. So how it affects the divine soul, we've learned, because that affects and elevates Chochmah of Atzilus. How does it affect the animal soul? Because this liyas nisamas gam etzla, that this makif, when you do a mitzvah. So before I talk about the mitzvah, before we learned that when a person contemplates on divine unity and uses also human intelligence to understand and appreciate it, that affects the animal soul. To also desire to understand, firstly, appreciate, and then desire godliness, the true reality. Now he's saying that the makiv of the kedusha of a mitzvah, when you do a mitzvah, also helps the nefesh habamis internalize and resonate with the divine truths. That's what he says. Makiv the kedusha al yen zusha b'mitzvahs liyes nesamas gam etzlah. It causes that etzlah by the animal soul should also be nesamas. Nesamas means resonating. Should feel the resonating truth. Hasogas atzmis alakus k'moshe b'kedushas atzmus mamish l'mayla m'mokadesh talshlos kanal. To have an understanding in the core of the divine, because what we're learning is something the animal soul's intelligence can understand. On its own, it wouldn't pursue it. It would pursue its own self-interest. But when you do learn Chassidus, and Chassidus explains it in the form of mipsari echzalakah, that we can understand it, that our own flesh can understand it because we can relate to this. So this causes the animal soul also to be able to appreciate and resonate with this with the Atzmus Elikus the way it is b'kedushas Atzmus mamish. That's higher than source of Ishtalshel's canal. Like remember we said earlier that Akashay Kedushanim Mitzvos with mitzvahs is higher than the kedusha of the Ishtalshel's kedusha, which is relative canal. This is a pretty powerful statement, but we've already learned something similar to it when we learned about the neshama, that the animal soul can come to appreciate these high levels as well. He's going to qualify, obviously, that it's not quite like the divine soul, but right now that's what he said here, that it could appreciate this kedushas atzmis. Atzogas atzmis elikus k'moshe b'kedushas atzmusei mamish. Va'afal pi, and even though she'iyev shelevas ativis, it's not possible for the natural soul lahasig or lahakir to comprehend and to recognize or to discern rak b'mesha bo l'keich hadimyan anushi, only something that is in its realm, in its capacity, l'keich hadimyan anushi, that it could imagine. In other words, the animal soul, being of limited personality, just cannot necessarily appreciate the most sublime levels. It has to be something, mashabal keich hadimyan anushi. The word keich hadimyan anushi can mean imagination, but here he doesn't mean imagination as an imagining something that is like, it means something that is in our capacity to imagine. The nefesh hativus cannot relate to something that's outside of its realm. It has to have some form of something in common with it. Like we learned earlier about the fact that the animal soul can understand that within all of existence lies a divine energy that creates it and sustains it. Just like, for example, the famous example Chassidus gives, if you see a stone flying in the air, the Nefesh Habamis, not just the Nefesh Eliki, the Nefesh Habamis understands there has to be someone who threw that stone, because the stone doesn't fly. So if you see a stone flying in the air, it means there's a koyach hapoel benifel. That means that somebody threw the stone, exerted energy. That energy was invested to carry the stone a certain distance, and that's what you. So you may not see the actual throw. You may not even see the energy, but the fact that the stone is moving means that something is driving it. That's something the animal soul can relate to. Koyach hapoel benifel, levade. So even though he's qualifying, so even though we just said that the kedushas mitzvos can be understood and resonate with the animal soul, even though the animal soul still has its limitations, only to the point that from that perspective, the world is seen as a separate entity from the godliness. So even though the godly energy can be appreciated by the animal soul, but the bottom line is the animal soul lives in a world that is disconnected. It's true, through its contemplation, it reconnects. But what he's trying to say is that the koyach hapoel benifel came into a world where the nifel, the production, the product, does not necessarily relate to the producer. And when it does relate to it, it's relating to it on its terms. So since it has this limitation, what do mitzvahs do? So even though this is true that the animal soul has its limitations, this is the power of a mitzvah. Gedusha the mitzvahs, through the gedusha of mitzvahs, that when the person does a mitzvah, because when you're putting on tefillin or tzitzis or any other physical mitzvah, not only a divine soul is involved, your animal soul is involved. So that what is the effect of the mitzvah on the animal soul? Nimshar gam b'koyach the nefesh habamis mekedesh Elyon anal. So what you're doing something is a tremendous achievement. You're drawing from the Kodesh Elyon of mitzvahs even into the animal soul. So the animal soul on its own could come to some level of comprehension of the divine, but not to the highest levels. But when you do a mitzvah, since the mitzvah, the makif of the mitzvah is drawing down this Kodesh Elyon, it's also affecting the animal soul. The tuchal gam hi, and this empowers the animal soul that it should be capable lahakir lahasig, to recognize and to comprehend ma'mitis atzmus elikus mamish, from the mitis of elikus mamish, of atzmus, of the core of elikus. Tremendous atheist about what a mitzvah does even for the nefesh habamis. Lefisha mitzvos nasim bedvarim gashmim, and the reason for that is because mitzvahs don't remain on Kodesh Elyon. They come down and are done through physical objects, through physical matter that the animal soul relates to. Shemazen nasa levusha makiv de kedusha. That when the mitzvah is done with this physical thing, so you take, as I mentioned, a piece of wool, or you take gold and silver and copper, you make a mishkan from it, or any mitzvah, anything that you take, talk about a ner, you take oil, and you turn it into a ner Shabbos, or ner Hanukkah, or any type of ner, or ner of the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash, the physical object itself, you're creating a levusha makiv de kedusha, because you've turned a physical thing into a channel for the divine kedusha of kedushana b'mitzvesa that's coming all the way from Kodesh Elyon of Atzmus. Af lenefesh habamis, also for the old animal soul, leisa gamkein, to also elevate it. So it's not, you say it elevates a divine soul, okay, but you're saying it also elevates an animal soul that on its own is an animal. It's only about its interest and focus is about its own needs. La leisa gamkein. He brings the same pasuk he brought at the end of the last paragraph, that your tzedakah, which is also your mitzvahs, your charity, your kindness, your generosity, meaning it's holach lefanecha, like he said before, pnimius. So when you give tzedakah in this world, physical tzedakah, you take money, and what's more materialistic than money? On its own, money can be used for own selfish greed and for all kinds of things that have nothing to do with godliness. But when you take your money and you give tzedakah to someone, you help someone, or you use it to build something of kedusha, that tzedakah is holach lefanecha tzidkecha. Again, tzidkecha is not just physical tzedakah; it talks about all kindness, all tzedakah. Shakol hatera mitzvahs nitnu l'neshamas begufim dafke. So these mitzvahs gashmis, all these mitzvahs were given dafke to neshamas begufim. A neshama in heaven can't do a physical mitzvah because it doesn't have a body, and it's not relating to a physical world. It's dafka neshamas begufim dafke umetam hanal, and for the reasons stated above, the no it's tchilasan b'seifan, that the beginning is wedged at the end, at the beginning top of the page, dafka. So the highest level is coming down dafka below neshamas begufim in this world. So it has that power. So called them is neshamas begufim dafka umetam hanal. That's not dafka. It has that power to transform darkness to light. Actually, the reading of Mitamanal, the Nosson Defke, is explaining why the highest is coming down in the lowest place in this world, and it has the power to transform darkness to light. Vanashama Atzma. 1 second. That should be a pause. So now we see how the animal soul also is affected. So even though the animal soul on its own would be limited to things that it relates to, but a mitzvah adds something to that it would not have on its own, and that is enabling the animal soul to also appreciate godliness on the highest levels. That's what the mitzvah does. Before I read on, what this brings to mind, which may help understand this as well, is when the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested, famous stories, and he was being tormented by his captors. Many of them, quite a few of them Jews, communist Jews, Yevsexia, were the biggest anti-Semites. And so when they asked him the famous story where they pointed a gun to his head and said, this object has made many people cooperate, Frierdiker Rebbe answered, this toy, this tzatzke, he said, this gadget, this tzatzke, this toy, can only frighten someone who has one world and many gods, every day another god based on their pleasures. So every day another pleasure. But it can't frighten someone that has one god and two worlds. Meaning, you're not going to frighten me because you say you're going to take away this world from me. I have another world, spiritual world. So then when they continued the conversation, this is lesser known, but then they asked the Frierdiker Rebbe why why he's so connected to Yiddishkeit. I don't remember the exact question, but that was the content of it. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was talking to people who were intelligent. They were philosophical even. So he said to them, if you want to understand the connection to Yiddishkeit, you have to do a mitzvah. That's what he said. I can't just talk about it. If you put on tefillin, you eat kosher, you keep Shabbos, you'll begin to understand. And when they said to him, why? He said, because there are things that you can't understand unless you do it. And he gave an example. I'm trying to remember what the example was. The Rebbe gives the example of the military. He told Sharon, it's not just enough to read military strategy in books. You have to actually train. Friedrich Rebbe says there, I have to look up the exact details, but basically he says that unless you do it, you can't fully appreciate it. And actually, it did affect them. They realized that there's a truth to that. You can talk about things all day until you don't do it, it doesn't have that effect. So it comes to mind reading this, that there's something when you do a mitzvah, it's not just reading about it, it's not just contemplating it. The actual action that you're doing affects you. Just like, God forbid, if a person reads about something negative, it's not the same as when you act on it. You can read about things that are evil, like Adam and Chava were aware that there was good and evil, but they didn't act on it. Once you taste from the forbidden fruit, it's a whole new world. Experience, in other words. Action changes things. So the same thing in the positive, and much more so. That the actual act of a mitzvah does something, even for the animal soul. It gives you a taste of something that's Kedusha. When the Rebbe came out with Mitzvot Tefillin, for example, after the 6-day war, so people said, you're meeting a person who has no connection to Yiddishkeit. He's not Shemer Torah mitzvahs. Put it on tefillin one time. What are you already accomplishing? And the Rebbe explained it's not correct. When a person does a mitzvah even once, it has a tremendous impact, permanent impact on the person. Obviously, you want it to have follow-up, and you want it to a person to grow mitzvah after mitzvah and to do things more consistently. But never underestimate the power of bringing Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvos tzivanu into a person's life through an action. So it just comes to mind, that story. So what he's saying here is that when the Maisa mitzvah does something to the animal soul that all the contemplation in the world will not accomplish, which may come to help explain what the mitzvah is adding to Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. Because Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, he said, that's coming from the contemplation of the divine soul. And it's explaining the idea of Achdus Hashem, Hashem is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, also to the animal soul. But a mitzvah does another thing here. A mitzvah is an action. When you actually give tzedakah to someone, you're drawing down the Kodesh Elyon from the highest levels, not Seifon, Tchilos, and Beseifon, into the animal soul, having this impact that we're talking about here from the highest levels, impacting that it should enable the animal soul to appreciate and understand godliness that can only come through this type of action. So he didn't spell out what I just said, that that's what it adds, but it's very clear that he's speaking about Dafka Mitzvah doing this. Okay. Before I continue, any questions on what we just learned? It's a pretty heavy piece about the power of a mitzvah. I'm going to look up that story, the details. He says that you have to do it. You have to do it. He may have given the example there. Not sure. Maybe of medication. You can talk about taking a medication like a painkiller or an aspirin, but unless you take it, it's not going to affect you. I think he gave an example from Refuah, now that I'm remembering it, which would work very well. In other words, you can talk about it all day, but if you don't take the actual medication, it's not going to affect you. Just talking about it or thinking about it. I'm going to look it up.
I'm wondering. Sorry, I had a question.
I'm going to look it up, but I think that I gave that example. The Rebbe, when Arik Sharon, the former general and prime minister of Israel, spoke to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe, why is he so adamant about mitzvah tefillin? The action of actually doing tefillin, people can learn and read. So the Rebbe said to him, I'm surprised that you're asking this question. You're a general. And imagine your forces would say to you, Why do we need to train? Why do we need to actually go into training battlefield training in the battlefield? We can just read books. There are many, many books on military strategy and military methodologies and so on. So Sharon said to the Rebbe, "What do you mean? A book is just a book. They have to actually have the experience." So the Rebbe said the same thing. They can learn and talk about it all day, but until you don't put on film, you're not actually doing the actual exercise. That is what changes things. So a similar idea as well. Okay. As I said, I'll look it up more detail. Go ahead. You wanted any questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah. What the Rebbe is giving over here is clear enough, and you've explained it even better. But it's it almost strikes one as kind of like I don't want to say magic, chas v'shalom, like I'm just saying lahabdil, like in Mashal is like you just do it and it happens. And I mean it's very powerful, and it's saying mamish like it's transformative. So when you ask how do you transform the nefesh Bahamas, do a mitzvah. He's mamish saying it's by doing it, it's transformative. I'm just sort of wondering, like, what are the mechanics of that? It's not necessarily as clear with Nerashim Nishmas Adam.
Well, I just gave the example from military, but let's say you were teaching your child how to swim, and you give them books to read, you talk to them, and then you say, now it's time to jump into the water. And they say, why do I have to jump into the water? I read all about it. I understand it all. And your answer is going to be, because if you don't do it, you don't experience it, you're not going to ever learn how to do it. You can't just read a auto driving manual. You have to actually start driving and be trained in the action. Would you call that magic? I wouldn't call that magic. The power of experience, a power of action. So the point here is not a magical thing at all. Mitzvah is Hashem's commandment. So it's Asher Kedushanu Mitzvos Tzivanu. And the action of the mitzvahs, which is only possible by a soul in a body, which is why the souls in heaven in a way are jealous of souls on earth, and that's ultimately what convinces them to come down below, is because only here you can actually do a mitzvah. You can actually do a favor for another person. You could actually give them tzedakah or the other mitzvahs we spoke about, or all the mitzvahs. So I wouldn't call them out. It's the power of action. It's like I tell people all the time, just an example. You go to someone for, let's say, a donation or an investment in your business, and they listen to your pitch and your proposal and everything, and they're smiling and they're saying, great, beautiful, wow, excellent, this is great stuff. And you feel good in your heart because you feel, hey, you know what? I was convincing, and I will have succeeded, close this prospect, close this deal. And then you leave the office never getting a check, nothing signed. You could say, 1 second, the person told you everything is so beautiful. There's so much with you. I'm with you. I'm supporting you, and so on. Because there's something in this world of action called action. If you don't sign the dotted line, if you don't write a check, if you don't actually do something, say, what do you mean? Why do I have to do anything? I told you my heart is with you. My mind is with you. My heart is with you. My blessings are with you. You'll say, well, in this material world, my friend, unless I don't have the money in the bank, I'm missing the main thing. It doesn't matter what your heart is with me and your soul is with me. So it's not called magic. It's called the material world needs material action.
Yeah. It reminds me.
So it's the Ma'aseh mitzvah that triggers, the actual mitzvah triggers the Kodesh Elyon that is embedded in the mitzvah. So before you do the mitzvah, it remains somewhat removed from our existence. And when you do the mitzvah, you're manifesting it and drawing it into Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Abamis.
It's very helpful. It reminds me, muscle that works for me is the difference between driving a car and being a passenger in a car, especially if you're new at it.
What happens if you're a backseat driver?
That's even worse.
Right.
But no, it's an interesting hybrid actually. But no, when you're a passenger, everything looks so simple, and then or anything where you have to take on a lot of responsibility. Let's say, for example, in my field, going into the courtroom and arguing before a judge or taking a deposition, and when you see people do it on TV, and you say, "Oh, that looks so simple. Like he's an idiot. I could do that so much better." And then you find yourself in the hot seat, having the spotlight's on you, and you've got to be articulate. And all of a sudden, you're like, "Whoa, yeah."
Anybody that, as a speaker and as a writer, people who are obviously inexperienced will say, what's the big thing? You got up and gave a speech. What's the big thing? You wrote a book. I could do it also. I remember how many people telling me, okay, you listened to the Rebbe, you have a good memory, you were able to write it down. And I wasn't insulted. It was completely like someone who doesn't even begin to understand. They never have experience. I said, "Did you ever write anything?" No, but how difficult could it be? I said, try it out and let me know. It's absolutely, there's something.
That was a very helpful explanation. That's a really good one. Thank you.
I just want to add that look at what's been going on in Israel with the soldiers. They're reporting incredible miracles just by putting on tefillin, or it's just unbelievable what's going on. I mean, they're seeing.
Absolutely never underestimate the power of an action. Action does something like nothing else can do. All the words in the world and all the thoughts, something about an action that triggers things. I mean, in physics, it's a common concept. Without that, you could have all the concepts right, but if it doesn't get if you don't trigger, if you don't ignite the spark, it's all theoretical. I'm sorry for cutting you off. I just wanted to throw that in.
Not at all. I just wanted to say, in my own experience, unless you have some skin in the game, you're invested in it. You're physically taking the energy and doing it. It's not gonna make as much. It's just not the same. That.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
I have a question about the specific mitzvah of tzedakah because, whatever. There's a JLI course, if you know what that is. It's like the adult education arm of Chabad for, let's say, more balei tshuva, if you will. Anyways, there's a whole module on the mitzvah of tzedakah and working, but even other modules, even about health. And in fact, they showed an interview last night on the module about health. Your father was in the hospital, and I guess the Rebbe said you have submission to do there. And, as soon as you complete it, you'll come out. Anyways, the mitzvah tzedakah comes up prominently in this JLI course throughout these different modules and different themes. And I'm wondering if the Rebbe was focused on that particular mitzvah because it's so basic, and it's so the issue of transforming the material and the spiritual is so literal. I'm just wondering if the Rebbe focused on that because it's so literal in what it does, to levar and to transform, to transform the
one word answer
klipa.
is yes. One word answer is yes. That's correct. And if you want to, but it's not the Rebbe, is not the original for it. It comes from, if you look in Tanya, chapter 37, he says, why is tzedakah, when you say mitzvah stam in Yerushalmi, it's referring to tzedakah. When the word mitzvah is used in the Gemara and Talmud Yerushalmi, it always means tzedakah, because the personification, if you wish, the ultimate personification of all mitzvahs is in tzedakah for the reason you mentioned and more than that as well. He explains it there, because tzedakah captures the idea of refining the material world and the animal soul. Like he says there, every mitzvah deals with one aspect of the animal soul, but tzedakah deals with money. And money is chaya nafshe, he calls it. It represents all of us. It represents your time, your energy, your ingenuity, your value. That's why he says it's so difficult to give tzedakah. It's easier to put on tefillin than to give tzedakah, because tefillin is one part of you, not one part of the animal soul, your head, your mind, your heart. But tzedakah is, the money represents all of you. That's why people value money, because money is like a piece of my very flesh. You want my money, you want everything of me. You want the time, my ingenuity, my ego. I mean, everything is in there. And explains there at length why tzedakah is the ultimate, said do you say the penultimate or the quintessential mitzvah?
Quintessential, yeah. Excellent. Thank you. You always say things 100 times better than even an articulate person. It's a gift.
Yeah. Thank you. So let us, might as well finish the paragraph here. It would have been so great to see how the Rebbe Rashab would have developed this. What can I say? Okay. We'll have to wait till the Rebbe Rashab returns with Mashiach's coming, and maybe then finish Ayin Beis.
You have to promise you're going to hold a shiur in Yemos Mashiach, and we can come back and everything will be much more clear for us. And you can explain it all to us because it'll be most clear to you.
I would like the Rebbe Rashab to come back and tell us what he would have written here.
Beautiful, lovely. Alavai.
Yeah.
And you
We'll do our best. Listen, all the Rebbes are one. So the Rebbe Rashab, the Mittler Rebbe are one. It's just that we're seeing it through the lens of the Mittler Rebbe, not completely the lens of the Rebbe Rashab. But it's fine. This is far better than if we didn't have this mimer. What can I say? Okay. So now he goes back just to round things out to what he said earlier. So what are we adding now so far? Levad Zeis is that Maisa Mitzvahs, besides what it does for the divine soul, it does for the animal soul, elevating it to such a level that it would never be able to reach on its own. So now he says, remember we said earlier, Neshama Atzma Ein Tzorech Tikkun. The Neshama itself does not come down, does not need Tikkun of this nature. The animal soul needs Tikkun because it's not on its own, it's an animal soul. It's driven by self-interest. The divine soul on its own is driven by the divine. So you could say the divine soul, why is it coming down below? So yes, it gets elevated in the process, but it doesn't come down strictly for itself. It comes down levader el nefesh tivis to refine the natural soul. Like you see, is very interchangeable. He says nefesh habamis, nefesh ativis, nefesh achiyunis, nefesh asichlis. I already pointed this out earlier. I wouldn't. Because you're wondering, it's not, maybe, of course, every expression is exactly properly nuanced. But generally, I see he's interchanging very often these different expressions. So it's only to mevar the nefesh hativish shetaligam he, that she too, meaning that the nefesh hativis, the natural soul, should also elevate al yedei ha-mitzvahs begashmis, she'osa begufei ubemamayne be'elam hazeh dafka. Through the physical mitzvahs that he does with its body and with its money in this material world. Maybe why he's focusing on money, like I just explained from Tanya. He says clearly, mamoine. Money, again, is the quintessential symbol of materialism. So, bottom line, so the Neshama it's for the Nefesh Habam that it too should elevate. And now he's bringing a raya that it gets elevated. You could say, how do we know that Nefesh Habamis maybe doesn't get elevated all the way to the highest levels? He says, V'raya lezeh me'elam haba. He actually brought before elam haba, on the bottom of last page, in the parentheses. And we see this from, a proof for this is from elam haba. Elam haba is the world to come, dafke. That elam haba, we say, B'chol Yisrael yesh lem chelik le'elam haba. The Mishnah says clearly, every Jew has a part in the world to come, a portion in the world to come. Ba'afila peish Yisrael meleim, and there's mitzvahs kerimen. And even sinners in Israel are filled with mitzvahs. He just says meleim, but the full statement is meleim kerimen, which is filled with mitzvahs like pomegranate seeds. The point here he wants to focus that even Peish Yisrael are filled with mitzvahs. That's why Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelik le'elam haba. Why Kol Yisrael? What about those that are sinners? But even sinners have mitzvahs, and mitzvahs is what creates elam haba, because mitzvahs generate and trigger divine energy of Kodesh Elyon. So that's the elam haba. Rak shezeh ha'er hagadol min ha'maisa mitzvahs. Rak shezeh ha'er hagadol min ha'maisa mitzvahs me'erak b'chinas makif behelam ala adam. So why? So what's the difference? If it's not a Peish Yisrael, it's like a tzaddik or a Beinani, or even a Rosh V'Tevle. So there, the mitzvahs also radiate in Pnimius. A Peish Yisrael, Milei mitzvahs, has mitzvahs, so the mitzvahs don't totally refine and transform them, but they still have an effect. The effect is that they made b'makiv behelem ala adam, u'komeshikosav v'shemel al reishach, lo yechser, lo. Like he said before, shemel al reishach. He said on the top of page 391. Al reishach means the oil is on the oil is on your head, which is above you, meaning it's not permeated, but it's there. And when will it be revealed? By Yidei Yizgalim in a Helem. Yidei probably he means that as a person, I'm assuming he means. I'm not sure that Yidei Zeh, because it's not through the actions of the mitzvahs. It means probably through the revelation. And that's what will create, from that will manufacture basically, that are the building blocks of Elam Haba, Shehu Schar HaMitzvah Sheizgalim in Ha'enega Atzmus Shebehen Kanal V'dal. So Elam Haba is made up of this, the schar of the mitzvahs that you do. Even a Peish Yisrael. So even though it may not be radiating within him right now, that's why he's a sinner. He's called a sinner, a transgressor. But the schar of mitzvahs will be, Elam Haba will be revealed from the core pleasure that was generated when a person did a mitzvah. So even a Peish Yisrael does a mitzvah, it's not, God forbid, for no purpose. It touches and draws down Kodesh Elyon. The thing is, it's in the form of makif and behelim. And Elam Haba is when it's revealed. Kol Yisrael Yeshlam Chelik Elam Haba. It will be revealed, which is, Elam Haba sometimes refers to Gan Eden, but it also refers to Tchias HaMesim in the future, when all the Gilei Elokus that has been generated and manifest throughout Torah mitzvahs today will be revealed. Like Chassidus explains that when you do a mitzvah today, even though you may not see its effect, but it's like munach b'kufsa. The Rebbe brings in the first Maimer Bas Lagani from the Rebbe Marash. So he brings there, that's like munach b'kufsa. It's like an energy was generated, but it's placed inside of a chest. It's being stored somewhere. And the Asad Lave is just going to reveal that which was already created. So it's not, it's like when you think of a volcano erupting. It's not that the volcano suddenly when it erupts is all that energy. The energy was built up and pent up, is just under the earth. Or the same thing with an earthquake. I don't mean to bring natural disasters. I'm just mean to give an example. There's tremendous energy generated, you just don't see it. When Mashiach Megu'ula comes, Elam Haba, all of it will explode, erupt in a beautiful way, and it will all be revealed. What will be revealed? This tremendous Tainaga Atzmi that was generated through mitzvahs. So the Rai is bringing from Elam Haba is that no matter what happens, that even if you don't see it today, he's saying it's still the entire person is being affected, that both the divine soul and the animal soul as well. And even if you don't see the effect right away, but it's being built up and will be revealed in Elam Haba. And that's why Kol Yisrael Yeshlam Chelik Le'Elam Haba. Because everybody has mitzvahs. Question is whether the mitzvahs have affected them in a revealed way or not in a revealed way.
So are you saying that we're actually contributing to our own Olam Haba, and by doing the mitzvahs, we are building our Olam Haba?
Absolutely, not just contributing, creating it.
That's incredible.
Okay, well, it's the beginning of chapter 37 in Tanya. It talks about that. Schar mitzvah mitzvah, he says. That the reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. And he explains what does that mean? Because every mitzvah generates divine energy. So you do a mitzvah, you're actually, the reward is not just like throwing a candy to you. Reward is the outgrowth of your action. The action actually generates that energy and that. So the reward is just a manifestation, a revelation of the power of the mitzvah.
So are we all doing it for each other? I mean, or is it just, how does it work?
Both. It's we're individuals. It's just the same question. We're individuals for ourselves, but also we're part of a community, and it's accumulative. The entire, when you do a mitzvah, it says, the Rambam says, a good thought, a good word, a good action brings tshuva v'atzal l'chol ha'olam. It brings you salvation and redemption and the entire world. It's both. It affects you personally, but each of us is part of the bigger picture. So it also has a cosmic effect and an accumulative effect. So it's both is correct. When you play music in an orchestra, who does it contribute to? Only you or also to the orchestra?
That's so wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Robin, there's a lot to feel good about.
Absolutely.
Robin, what did you think was it? What did you think it was before we learned this stuff? I mean, isn't this stuff that we sort of believe?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sometimes you need it spelled out. What the
I always had trouble understanding
everything.
The
I was
reward
just responding to Tzvi. Not everything you hear. Sometimes you may have heard it earlier, but then there's something that's said that just helps resonate the idea. Go ahead. Sorry, what were you saying, Robin?
Not at all. I just wanted to say I've read it and I never quite really got it. You know, so I guess it takes a while for me to get stuff, but I mean this was very helpful in really fully understanding it. So thank you.
Great.
And get in it too. Nice.
It's perfectly fine. This happens all the time. I read it. I've heard this idea before as well, of course, and learned it many times. But then you learn it again. It resonates deeper. By the way, I pointed out V'ayidei zeh is galim in helam. I said, what's V'ayidei zeh? So I look down below, and it's actually in a different manuscript. It's not V'ayidei zeh. It's L'osid lava yizgala min helam. That makes much more sense because I didn't understand what's V'ayidei zeh. L'osid lava yizgala min helam. Today it's concealed, and in the future it'll be revealed from the concealed. So if you look in manuscript 2 and 6. The V'ayidei zeh is L'osid lava, which is definitely the right way to read it because V'ayidei zeh doesn't really make sense here. Okay. So we finish end of page 393, the end of the paragraph. Beautiful paragraph.
Rabbi, I have a question before you end it.
One second. You can mark this. If you ever want to go back to this and say you want to have a good paragraph about the power of a mitzvah, what it does, I think this paragraph is you should highlight it. Very powerful paragraph about the power of mitzvahs. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so because the Rebbe has mentioned this pasuk from Koheles, V'shemen al roshcha, al yachsar lo yachsar. So I checked it out, just checking out Koheles, and then it also he originally references it from the Zohar. So I pulled the Zohar, which I just posted in the WhatsApp group. And it's interesting in the paragraph where this
is that the Zohar Bolok? Is that the Zohar and Bolok 187?
Yeah. Well, no, this is Bolok Perik Vav. So I don't know.
No, Zohar is not by Prokim; it's by pages. Maybe.
Well, it talks about.
Okay, whatever. Okay.
It talks about the metaphor of a candle, ironically, but in this case. He's saying the goof is the psila, and the mitzvah is the shemen. Isn't that interesting?
Where does it say the goof is the psila?
It says begin the gufa de bar nash iu psila.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be consistent. I mean, there could be different interpretations.
Yeah, no, I just say it's ironic that we're using this mushal of the candle or the lamp, and in the proof for near mitzvah Torah, or it comes up with another way of seeing the
not necessarily because well, here he says on top of 391 he says psili nishmas adam. And that's what he brings with Zel Shekosa Bezeir V'Shemen al Reishcha. Reishcha or Reishach?
It's Reishcha.
Oh, that's what I said, I think. Okay, fine. Lo Yechsa. You see on the third and fourth line of page 391?
Yeah, I see.
Oh, that's exactly what you're referring to. Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's where I looked it up. But
okay, so
if you look, yeah. I'm just saying
it's not.
It doesn't seem like it supports it. But what? I don't know. It just confused me.
It doesn't all have to be consistent. There can be different interpretations.
Yeah.
Here he says, "Mimutza de psila shinishmas adam." So the shemen, which is the mitzvahs done with the gashmis, the matters kola ba'ir, u'kameshis ba.
Maybe he's saying because the mitzvah is the transformation of the gashmius into ruchnius, then they're consistent in that sense that the mitzvah is the shemen.
As I said, in Ayin Beis, he interpreted also differently. He said that so it's. We'll see. First of all, the Mittler Rebbe didn't finish. Let's see how he continues on. Maybe he'll give us some more clarity on this. But even if it stays where it is, it's fine to. It's not a contradiction. There's different ways to explain it. That's all.
Right. Maybe it could be in less love when the goof nourishes the neshama, and that's what he's talking about at that time.
Yeah, that's an interesting type, Svi. Anyways, I just wanted to ask it and also point it out.
I'll look it up as well to see what it says there. Okay. So we'll stop here. Bottom of page 393. We'll stop here.